Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Nathalie Himmelrich. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded, produced and edited by me, Nathalie Himmelrich. Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. Go to bit.ly/support, capital G, capital T, and podcast. I repeat, bit.ly/supportgt podcast. Thank you so much. And for more information, please visit Nathalie's website, join the podcast Instagram page, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates on future episodes. Welcome to today's episode. My name is Nathalie Himmelrich, and I'm your host. Today, this podcast turns 4 years old. The sun is setting outside, and I wanted to take a moment to say that simply, without any decoration, because it deserves to be said plainly. 4 years, 200 episodes, coming into season 20. Guests from across the world, and you, the people listening, from more countries and more life circumstances than I could have imagined. When I sat down to record the very first episode that I released June 21st, 2022. This episode is not an interview. There is no guest today. Today I want to speak directly to you, to all of you. The people who have been here from the beginning and the people who found this show just last week. I want to thank you. And I want to thank the guests who have trusted me with their stories, their expertise and their time. And I want to reflect honestly on what 4 years of sitting inside the territory of grief and trauma has given me, and what I hope it has given you. So this is the episode I have been building toward without knowing it. So let's begin. This podcast would not exist without the people who said yes when I asked them to come and talk about the hardest things. Over 4 years, I have spoken with psychotherapists and grief specialists, researchers and authors, somatic practitioners and spiritual teachers, nurses and end-of-life doulas, polyvagal theorists and trauma coaches. I have spoken with people who lost children, spouses, parents and partners. People who survived suicide loss and domestic abuse. People who are in the very first weeks of grief. And people who are 20 years into it and still learning what it asks of them. These guests came from Australia, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Europe, and many more countries. Some of them I had known for years before we recorded. Some of them I met for the first time in that conversation and felt immediately that we had been speaking the same language for a long time without knowing it. Some of them I have now spoken 3 or 4 times because one conversation was not enough to contain everything they had to offer. So what I want to say to all of them collectively and with full sincerity is this: thank you. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for the courage it takes to speak about loss in public, in detail, without softening the edges to make it more comfortable. To the people listening to these podcasts, you are in the territory of real grief and real trauma. And you need real conversations. And that is what every guest has brought. There are so many special moments that I have been honored to experience with my guests, too many to mention. I have been blessed with being allowed to ask the questions many would shy away from, and especially going deeper into not just the story, but the person's innermost feelings and dealings with what was happening. Things that can often not be seen from the outside. 4 years of conversations about grief and trauma. Let me tell you what I have witnessed in these conversations. 4 years of conversations about grief and trauma, that does something to a person. And I say that not as a complaint. It is in many ways a privilege. So this is just an honest observation. As I have spent so much time in the presence of human loss, as I listened closely to this many accounts of what it is to survive the unsurvivable, something accumulates. And it is not grief exactly. It's more like a deepened understanding of what it means to be alive. So I have learned that grief is not linear, no matter how many times we say it. Every griever knows it intellectually and still gets caught off guard when the loss is as raw in year 3 as it was in week 1. I have learned that the body carries grief in ways the mind cannot always access, and that healing is not only a psychological process, it is a physiological one. I have learned that love and grief are not opposites. They are the same thing, seen from different angles. I have also learned that the questions grievers ask most often are not complicated questions. They are simple ones like, am I doing this right? Will I always feel this way? Can I survive this? Is what I'm feeling normal? You might know these questions, and the fact that these questions often go unanswered for so many people, not because the answers don't exist, but because our culture has not created enough space for grief to be spoken out loud, is part of what keeps people isolated in their pain long after isolation is necessary. So this podcast has tried to be an answer, and not the only answer, but a consistent, honest, expansive one. And the guests who have joined me have made that possible. So my own thinking has shifted over those 4 years into a deep trust into the workings of humans dealing with grief and loss. People's story have shown me that even though their body knew the way, it often became clear that having someone beside them, someone who knew the territory and held their hand along the way, made a huge difference. Now I want to talk about you, the listeners. Because over 4 years, I have received many messages and reviews and emails from people who have listened just like you. Some have listened to the podcast in circumstances I could not have anticipated when I made it. And I want to share some of what I have heard. Not as individual stories, but because they belong to the people who have shared them, but just as patterns, as evidence of what becomes possible when grief is spoken about, honestly and without shame. Some of you have told me that you listened to an episode in the morning of a funeral, and that it was the thing that helped you get up. I hold that with enormous care. This is not a small thing. This is someone finding in a stranger's voice through headphones enough to take one more step. Some of you have told me that hearing another person describe exactly what you were feeling, the particular texture of a grief that felt too specific, too strange, or too shameful to even name, made you feel less alone for the first time since your loss. This is not a small thing either. Isolation is one of grief's most corrosive effects, and to have that isolation broken, even briefly, even by a podcast, that matters. And many of you have told me that you feel heard, seen, and that something in a conversation between me and the guest made you feel that your grief was real and valid and worthy of acknowledgement, even when the people around you could not give you that. I know how much that costs. I know how heavy it is to carry grief in a culture who wants you to be finished with it before you have even begun. Some of you have found your way to support through this podcast. Maybe a therapist whose work you've heard and discussed here, or a book that gave language to something you had been trying to name. Maybe a modality like somatic work, polyvagal informed therapy, EMDR or ART that shifted something in your body that talking alone could not reach. Some of you found the courage to reach out to someone in your life to say, I'm struggling and I need you to know. Some of you have found creative ways to continue living, not in spite of your loss, but in relationship with it. Carrying your grief differently or building what grief researchers call a continuing bond, a way of staying in relationship with the person you lost, not as a way of avoiding their absence, but as a way of honoring their love that does not end when a life does. And I want to ask you something. I want to ask it directly because I think you deserve directness from me after 4 years of this. If this podcast has given you something, even once, even in one conversation, even for 10 minutes on a hard morning, I am asking you to share it. Not because I need the numbers, though the numbers do matter for the podcast's reach, but because there are people in your life or in your extended community or in the world who are carrying grief right now in silence, who do not know that conversations like this exist, who would benefit from knowing that there is a place where grief is taken seriously and spoken about honestly and treated with care it deserves. Send this to someone you know who is grieving. Share it on your social media or mention it to a friend or a family member who has experienced a loss. And remember, the loss doesn't have to be a loss through death. It can be a loss of identity or a loss of value or loss of any kind. And you do not need to say anything elaborate. You can simply say, I found this helpful. Maybe you will too. If you have not yet left a review, I would ask you to do that. Reviews on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, or whatever platform you use, they help other people find this show when they are searching for something that speaks to what they are going through. A 5-star review takes less than a minute, and it can be the reason someone in their worst week finds something that helps them through it. Rate the podcast, subscribe if you haven't, and if you have been listening for a while and have never quite gotten around to doing any of these things, today, on the 4th anniversary, is a good day to start. And I want to close by speaking to you, the person listening right now. I do not know your story. I do not know what brought you here today, or how long you have been in the middle of what you're carrying. I do not know if this is the first episode you have ever heard of this podcast, or if you have been here since the beginning. But I know that you are here now. And I know that the fact that you are here, that you are still searching for things that might help, still listening, still trying to understand what you're going through, is evidence of something important. You have not given up. Even if it feels like you have. Even if some days the most you can do is to press play on an episode you've already heard because you cannot bear the silence. That is not giving up. That is grief doing what grief does, asking you to keep showing up. Whatever form showing up is available to you today. And if you want to reach out to me directly, there's a send a text button in the show notes of every episode. I read every message. I reply to every message individually. And knowing that you are out there, knowing what you are going through, what helped, what didn't, what you're still looking for, that matters to me and it shapes what I make. So please reach out. Tell me what you need. Tell me what has helped. Tell me what question you're still sitting with that no episode has yet answered. I am here. I have been here for 4 years and I intend to keep going. 4 years ago, I sat down and recorded a conversation with a woman I had known for years about something that matters more than almost anything: how we survive the loss that define us, and how to find our way back to living after they have changed everything. That conversation is still one of the most listened to episodes in the podcast history. And I think that tells me everything I need to know about why this show exists and what it is for. If you want to know more about my personal story, you can find it. I speak about it in the podcast in many episodes. Just look out for my name. I tell you about myself, about my losses, about my trauma. I get very personal here. And I want you to be here with whatever is showing up for you today as well. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for trusting this podcast with the parts of your life that most need to be spoken about. Keep reading. I promise it will get easier. Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nathaliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Nathalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep reading. I promise it will get easier.